Okay, you're good to go.
Awesome. We'll start here in 1 minute. Brooke, Ron, Debbie, Susan, Michael. We have 6.
We need 7, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we need 1 more.
We do have 7, including yourself.
That's true.
Oh, okay. I count.
Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome.
There's Mr. Okay, so we're gonna start here in just 2 seconds when I pull this up. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and call our Las Cruces Economic Recovery Ad Hoc Board meeting to order. It is currently Thursday, September the 3rd, and it is 10 o'clock on the dot. So we're gonna go ahead and start getting this going. If there's any conflict of interest for this meeting, if you'll please raise your hand so we can address those at this time. Okay, I am seeing none. So there's no conflict of interest for this meeting. Moving on to the acceptance of the agenda that was sent out. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, if you'll please voice those at this time by raising your hand. As I'm seeing no comments, questions, or concerns, we would entertain a motion at this time to accept the agenda as is. Mr. Harris.
I think you might have meant Mr. Fitzherbert. He's got his hand up.
Oh, Mr. Fitzherbert, sorry. Ron.
Yeah, Ron Fitzherbert for the record. I move to accept agenda.
Perfect, thank you. We have a motion to accept the agenda as is by Mr. Fitzherbert. Do we have a second?
This is Michael Harris. I'll second it.
Okay, we have a movement and a second by Mr. Harris to accept the agenda as presented. Is there any comments, questions, or concerns or further discussion on the agenda as presented today? Okay, as I am seeing none, if I can please get a roll call vote on the acceptance of the agenda as presented.
Mr. Chair, this is on the vote to accept the agenda as presented. Mr. Michael Harris?
Yes.
Mr. George Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Sharon Thomas? Ms. Sharon Thomas is absent. Ms. Brooke Montgomery?
Yay.
Ms. Veronica Archuleta? Ms. Veronica Archuleta is absent. Mr. Ron Fitzherbert?
Yes.
Mr. Doug Cowan?
Yes.
Ms. Susan Greenwald?
Yes.
Ms. Jolene Martinez?
Yes.
Ms. Arlene Lopez? Ms. Arlene Lopez is absent. Ms. Debbie Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Beautiful. Motion does pass. We do have our agenda for the afternoon. Next up, we have the minutes for approval that were sent out. I hope you all got them. I know that they were distributed earlier. if there's any questions on the minutes that were presented. If not, we'll go ahead and entertain a motion for the accepting of the minutes.
This is Michael Harris. I'll motion to accept the minutes.
We have a motion for Mr. Harris to accept the minutes as given. Do I hear a second?
Debbie Moore for the record, second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second by Mrs. Moore to accept the minutes as given to us, presented. Is there any discussion on the minutes that we have? As I'm seeing none, can I please get a roll call vote on the acceptance of the minutes as presented?
This is on the acceptance of the minutes as presented. Mr. Michael Harris,
Yes.
Mr. George Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Sharon Thomas. Ms. Sharon Thomas is absent. Ms. Brooke Montgomery, sorry.
Yay.
Ms. Veronica Archuleta. Ms. Veronica Archuleta is absent. Mr. Ron Fitzherbert,
Yes.
Mr. Doug Cowan,
Yes.
Ms. Susan Greenwald,
Abstain?
Ms. Jolene Martinez,
Yes.
Ms. Arlene Lopez. Ms. Arlene Lopez is absent. Ms. Debbie Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you. We've accepted the minutes to the prior meeting. Moving on, we're getting through this pretty fast, guys. Thank you for that. We do have two discussion topics. One is going to be childcare, which we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. And the other one is going to be economic development, the PRC and the business impact survey, which we're going to be going over. I know that our vice chair, Ms. Debbie Moore, did reach out to LCPS to get a presentation from them and their efforts, which Ms. Debbie Moore has been working on as well. So we will have Debbie Moore presenting on this a little bit and talking to us about it, and we can have a discussion. And then just so you all know, next week we will have LCPS Superintendent Karen Trujillo on with us, Dr. Karen Trujillo. So she will be with us to go over some things that they're working on as well. But to get the ball moving on childcare, Ms. Debbie Moore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Debbie Moore for the record. Childcare has been a topic of many meetings discussion, particularly as schools begin to open. So I'm just going to preface it by saying, based on some things that Councilor Gondara said last week, in my research, and certainly Mrs. Martinez can relate to what I'm going to say. We sort of have two issues right here. One is the child care as it directly relates to the school and the virtual school, et cetera. Then the other is more of the long term of the accessibility to child care, financial burden, particularly the cliff effect as it affects some of the parents within our community. So I'm also working on someone that can address that issue as well. But ironically, we just got a Francisco, if you would share your screen, I received a flyer today from NMPED, and it is looking for childcare. And Francisco, can you share that?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, I am simply requesting the permission from Dominic to be able to share my screen.
So PED has put out a looking for childcare PDF with some links on it. And so I wanted to share that with you, and then the city staff will email it to everyone as soon as it's over with, as soon as this meeting is over with. So you can see the title of it is Looking for Childcare. Francisco, if you could move the screen down just a little bit. So on the left-hand side, you can see you can search for childcare by your county, zip, radius, school district, etc. how do I pay for childcare? Visit, am I eligible? And that would be for childcare assistance. And so in the middle, which I think is very creative, they're interested in becoming a temporary friends, family, and neighborhood childcare provider, and then you may be able to receive childcare assistance funding. So I think the state PED has done a good job in partnership with the New Mexico Early Childhood Education and Care Department. I will say I've been pleasantly surprised. I haven't got a lot of calls here in Indiana County moving forward. I know there is a committee that Dr. Trujillo is working with her staff on in making certain there are opportunities for our parents here in Las Cruces to access some type of child care. I also am well aware that Boys and Girls Club, Ashley Echeverria has expanded some of their time frames to have kids there with virtual all day. So there are some opportunities that have become open. I think as the longer we stay virtual, they will need that more time. If we go back to hybrid, it could flex a little bit. And so I'm hoping next week Dr. Trujillo can address some of that. So thank you, Francisco. That's pretty much what I have to report. We being the chamber have been working very close with LCPS to try to, in the business community, to navigate this new water. So, Mr. Chair, that's it for today, and I will confirm Dr. Trujillo for next week. And also I will look on getting Ashley from Boys and Girls Club. So with that, I would stand for any questions if anyone has any.
Wonderful. Thank you for that information. I think that one pager is really awesome, and I think it's definitely some really good information. Ms. Montgomery, you do have your hand raised first. Go ahead.
Brooke Montgomery for the record. I guess my questions are, when addressing this, I think we really need to start thinking outside the box. I have had a lot of ideas about kiddos and what parents can do. And I don't know if there's too many, I know we're not regulating or mandating anything, and there may be too many barriers within the governmental systems, but maybe parents, like on that one pager, when it's talking about if you want to be a child care and they can get assistance, what I'm taking for that, I guess also just to clarify, is that, does that mean that a parent can become a child care provider, and in order to not mix kids up too much, we could send our kids to our friends during the day when we're working, and so that people can work? Is that, I guess that's a question. And then the other one is, when you brought up the hybrid versus virtual school, as just parents, we've been seeing a lot of different things. I don't even know if they're accurate, to be honest, but some of the discussions that parents have been having that I know are that hybrid is not really going to happen anytime soon. That's what they're talking about. Now, it may not be confirmed, and maybe that's something we need to ask Karen Trujillo. But there's this point of maybe we need to address it economically, that we assume hybrid's not going to happen, and that the kids will be home until December, and then also make recommendations, what if they're home for the entire school year? Because that's what parents are hearing. And I think the unknown is more stressful, because they're being told maybe they'll go back, maybe there'll be enough PPE, maybe they could do transportation and get them on buses safely. But I think parents are like, no way. And so if we know that the kids are going to be home and we just address it with that assumption, we can start making plans outside the box on who can watch the kids so that parents can work.
So Debbie Moore for the record, Ms. Montgomery, first of all, yes, Dr. Trujillo would be the one to answer them thoroughly. I can share with you the things that I know being on so many various committees. And with regard to the document I just showed you, it just literally hit my inbox 10 minutes before this meeting. So I haven't really accessed any of those links. I just wanted to make sure that we share it with you. I do know from a state level, in my conversations with PED and the early childhood, as well as the governor's office, we've really talked about the alternatives and options regarding care, supervision care, whether it be a child care, a parent actually helping and getting licensed very quickly so that they could do sort of a virtual learning center. So there is some discussions around virtual learning centers, whether it be in city, county-owned buildings, school, however, everyone's thinking outside the box, precisely if it continues long before, longer than we may, rumor has it, or anticipated. I will say, according to Secretary Stewart last week, if you watched that press conference, there's another press conference today at 3 o'clock. And they did say, they being PED, did say that the schools could go hybrid or back to school with the little guys, especially. They're trying to guide them into the system. I think rumors are totally out there. It will be each individual district decides. And I don't know, I haven't talked to Dr. Hill specifically about that as to when her decision will be made. So I think certainly the continuation of virtual could be, we really need to think about, be prepared for both. I kind of think the hybrid could be more complex, have more complexities to our business community than the 100% virtual. I know Dr. Trujillo is trying her best in the school board to find that medium where it's consistent with whatever is going on within, obviously, the health numbers. I will say these are questions that would probably be more appropriate for Dr. Trujillo and PED. And I really encourage you to, as a parent, I encourage all parents to really watch those press conferences. I don't have children. I have some grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the system. So I'm very curious, but I'm also curious and really watching the impact on businesses. I'm not sure the role of this committee is to make any choices like that, but I think it could help our board as we continue to navigate our suggestions to the city council on how they work with the schools and facilitate this movement of whether we go hybrid, whether we have a school 100%. There are a lot of things being thrown at a lot of people, including parents, and it's tough. I've found it quite humorous to see, not humorous, but humorous, having been there, is to watch some of our parents that are struggling. They work during the day, and then they're working with their children in the evening. It's the computer programs have been, computer programs have been challenging. And so I think at least we're all in the same boat, but how we as a recovery board could ultimately recommend to the city council. I know just last week they did add some funds to childcare, both for the provider and the person assistance in paying for it. So the city has stepped up with the funds to, I think it was over $1 million. Francisco, you can help me. I don't know how much exactly went to childcare, but I know that they're seeing it right now. I think we also need to think as this board, as we hit that proverbial R word, recovery, how we recommend to the city to navigate helping that childcare issue for those that are going to need it as they go back to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Rick Montgomery again. If it's okay if I just respond back. I do think it directly, it possibly correlates with our businesses. I'm working on one of my businesses partnering with another mom who's been home because she can't work and she hasn't been able to work. So she's taking on the administrative type roles, and we're splitting up some of the work so that we can keep the business going. It's really, I have some other students that have businesses, and they're really struggling. They've come over and they've told us they're struggling with their businesses because of the remote learning. For the younger ones, the older kids, they said they're doing okay. So I think, seeing that with the clients that I have, they're starting businesses, seeing that with the moms, it's definitely impacting them to keep continuing to run their small businesses. I guess, the city-owned buildings, that makes sense to me, is thinking outside the box. I want to throw out what I was thinking, but I don't know if there's too many governmental regulations on it. But can they use like the gyms and the cafeterias at the schools, spread them out and register? This may not work, but can schools register as virtual learning centers or childcare? Or is that like prohibited because they're an educational system? And if can they make themselves a childcare system? And because I think what I've seen, and this is what other parents and businesses that I've talked to have seen, that the schools can't run because they're educational. And so the barrier is that there's abilities to make the ratio different for childcare, but the schools just can't seem to do it. But what if they were able to open up the gyms, register as a childcare, split the kids up and space them apart? And then maybe they could even do work.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Montgomery, this is Debbie Moore for the record. I will tell you, ideas such as that has been thrown out. I've thrown them out a long time ago to this. Right now, the complexity is the schools are quote unquote shut down. And I will also forward that question on. I would highly recommend that you contact Dr. Trujillo's office directly with some ideas. Again, I know the ideas have also been in my conversations with Santa Fe, with the group that I mentioned, PED, early childhood, and the governor's office, has been to look at facilities under the youth COVID practices, which like Boys and Girls Club is already licensed. So I know, talking to Ashley here locally, they've looked at how they could utilize other facilities that are big, maybe city or county facilities, maybe not necessarily schools. There could be some complexities, and I'm just speaking off the top of my head with regards to future funding sources, how the legalities of the schools are, but they've also looked really, we've looked at empty buildings to see how we could potentially do the virtual learning centers. I do believe that a lot of these will be answered if the decision would be made to go 100% virtual, let's just say through the end of December. I think a lot of those conversations will take another level. I think it's also important, Brooke, is for these parents to talk to the school, there's a Yolanda Solis, Jolene, you may know her. She is working on the child supervision task force that I'm on as well. And so that is a group of child care providers. And so there's a lot of ideas. I think it's just really important that we somehow, I mean, I would be glad to be the source as the chamber for input, because again, I'm not sure, I don't know that this is a direct responsibility of this recovery board, but I certainly think with our networks, we can get the word out there on the complexities as that. And to Darlene Lopez, Ms. Lopez has joined the call. This is impacting our workforce. This is impacting our business owners. I've got a lot of businesses that have really stepped up and gone to a lot of virtual work from home just to accommodate and work with their parents. But I know parents are stressful, but I mean, I could be the clearinghouse for some information. We just got to, personally, I think we've got to get the parents off of Facebook and talking to people so we can start really determining what is going on within our community, whether it be the bubbles that you perform with your neighbors and educate your kids through virtual learning centers and do get, quote unquote, licensed childcare, which is quote unquote what it is. It's basically a licensed virtual learning center. But I think you, as members of this board and appointed representing the different areas, is that we need to use our network to get it out. But we've got to get that clearing information, because I can tell you people did not respond to the survey statewide like they needed to. And so we've got to get those. And I don't know how the school is actually following up with the parents to find out what their struggles are. I've heard a lot of struggles. And I know it's mostly for under 6th grade. Beyond 6th grade, most of them can navigate the different ones, but a kindergartner, a 1st grader, 2nd grader, the challenges are there. And so, Brooke, please, I mean, any of you on this call, please feel free to call me at the chamber, because we need to start getting this information directly to the school district so they'll understand, versus all the I read a lot of the comments on Facebook and Twitter, and I know parents are very frustrated, but we've got to start narrowing it down to assist the schools to make the right decision in the future based on the science. Of course, we want everyone healthy. That's the number one thing. But number two, how do we address the mental health and all the things that go with that? So That would be my recommendation for this board right now is please feel free to use me as a clearinghouse, or obviously Francisco would share things with me, is that we begin to get this information to the school district as they continue. They're navigating it too. It's new. You know, I also think we need to think about the teachers, you know, those that have children, it's a new world for them too. And so it's complex and it's challenging. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery.
Thank you. Mr. Harris and Mr. Miller have your hands raised. I'm not sure who had them first, but whoever wants to go next, please do chime in.
Okay, I'll go real quickly. I think Councilwoman George Miller, for the record, Councilwoman Gandara, when she was on with us a few weeks ago, she challenged us to bring something before the council, I believe. This is a key issue, and all the people in our organization, all our clients are, and all the business people we're working with, they said that they'll never get back to going full to a normal unless they get this thing fixed, and because of the complexities with the parents and getting free to even go to work or even to teach for the teachers. I think responding to Debbie, what you're saying, and Brooke, no matter if it's hybrid or fully remote, that means there's going to be a need immediately and continually for whether it's a virtual learning center or childcare. So there's something that needs, whether we don't need to wait for a decision. I think that's going to be there no matter what. So it just depends whether it's full day or part of the day. So I think I would recommend that we do something to forward to the council about a recommendation, maybe just this brochure that you got that says, okay, let's get the word out to the parents and to the potential child care providers to go ahead and start up. And something like that, at least to get something like that going. I'm glad that the money went out last week for some of that to help child care providers and maybe for the parents, but some type of funding for that would also be beneficial. So I'm looking to do. I think this is one of the key things that needs to get kicked off the ground just to get the recovery started. Thank you.
So, Mr. Miller, Debbie Moore, for the record, I wasn't really saying we don't have a role. The school district is ultimately under the guidelines of PED. However, with that said, I know in fact, I've got about 3 calls to return after this call today of childcare centers that are struggling, trying to get open again and getting staffed. So you have those childcare centers that are still not open. I have a list of them. I know which ones in our state have never been open since March. So how do we facilitate that? And we, being the Chamber of Commerce, is the administrator for the John Yannick County grants, the CARES Act that we received, I think, a little over $3 million. The city of Las Cruces is separate. So if you have a business license in city, you go to the city. If you have outside the city, you come to the county, which is administered through us. So we're hoping that will cause some of them. And I've actually got a call from the State Association of Child Care Centers. So I think, Mr. Miller, I think our recommendation could be strong on how we work with the city. And Francisco, would you do me a favor while I'm speaking? Would you look up the amount of money that was given and how it was distributed to child care out of their special meeting last week? So I think, Mr. Miller, we need to really, our recommendation be focused on how do we recommend and what do we recommend in addition to just maybe the dollars. It's the tools to help the child cares get open immediately, hire the right people, keep the employees employed, but at the same time, knowing full well some of them can't afford the daycare, they need to work, they're caught in between, there's the cliff effect. So there's those series that I think that this board could make recommendations. When I said not make recommendations is with the specific whether we go hybrid or that would be on the school district. But to reiterate, I just think we've got to get this information to the schools. And I've been involved, there's been several people, but it's got to be parents starting to reach out. And we need, I'm hearing from the business community. I'm hearing from the employees that are lost. I'm hearing from childcare workers that have lost their jobs. So there's several pieces to this, and I'm hoping that would be our recommendation, is the long term. How do we get these childcare centers back functioning? And that would be where I would say the recommendation. Is that fair?
I agree.
Okay. I just kind of, Dave Moore for the record, Mr. I'm just trying to separate the organizations and their responsibilities, but I think we all know we're all in this together. And it's only through conversation. It's only through partnerships and collaborations, and me being nosy Rosie and following every town hall meeting and Zoom that I can even pull all this together and know that. So thank you. Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Harris had a question.
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Harris.
Yeah, thanks. This is Michael Harris for the record. My question is basically that I totally agree with that statement that we should be trying to get this information out and cleared between all parties. I know it's hot off the presses, but that doc that you showed earlier is great, and would love to forward that to every employee or worker in the city. So I guess my comment on that was I know it's super fresh, but is that something that the city economic development department could send out, to the mailing list that they have been sending stuff out as soon as possible? And I don't know if there's anything they can do to streamline those processes, to get info like that out faster, or bigger lists. That seems like something that should go out to not just like the business list, but also maybe like utility customers, if that's appropriate. So that's my comment. Thanks.
So Mr. Chair, Mr. Harris, the minute we get off this, I will send it out to our listserv at the chamber. And typically what happens when we send it out is that our members are very, very good on sending it out to their listserv. And so these are very, very important. There's about 6 attachments actually to this. So I'm going to carefully go through all of them and see how many of them. This one I think will go out solo from the chamber standpoint, because I think there's been a lot of discussion about childcare. But certainly I encourage all of us, again, make use of your network. Make use of your email list to get this information out, and how we disseminate, again, that's cooperation and conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Harris.
Awesome, thank you. I believe it was Mr. Cowan and then Francisco. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, this is Doug Cowan. I'm going to defer to Mr. Pallares because he may be able to answer a couple of the questions. I have a question to ask, but perhaps Francisco can answer something. So I'm going to defer to him first, please.
Of course, Mr. Chair. Francisco.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is Francisco Pallares for the record. So kind of like a bit of a broader explanation. So the state government made available $150 million for those municipalities that were outside of Albuquerque, because Albuquerque was able to get the CARES grant funding first, because they have a population bigger than 500,000 people. Out of that 150,000, 100 million were dedicated to the local portion for the CARES Act, which is the portion that I think that has this childcare component. On the other 50 million goes for the business continuity grant. So with the business continuity grant, that's the one in which we are providing for the businesses, or we will be providing for the businesses. We are currently in the process of establishing all the guidelines that are associated to be able to deploy these funds. We need some council input. We need some input from legal. We need some input, and we're actually trying to streamline those processes as fast as we can right now, Mr. Harris, with regards to that. As soon as we have a clear set of guidelines, as we know, as we have it, we're going to be sending e-blasts, and we're going to be informing through all the means possible. We have a portion of our budget dedicated to that is going to marketing, so that businesses know what is out there and they can apply for some of this funding. Again, this is on the small business continuity portion of the grant, which if it is a business in childcare, and And some of these, which we haven't yet set in stone yet, but some of these definitions or requirements, if they meet them, they would be able to access some of this funding because they're a business, right? So that's some of the guidance that I just wanted to provide. Right now, we do not have anything set in stone yet. We are working through our own internal due diligence that has to go through the entire process. That's with that said, what we are actively doing right now is all of those businesses that are interested in applying to it. We are currently compiling a list of all the people that as soon as we have something ready, we can send out and everyone has a chance to apply. So that is what we are currently at and the stage at which we're at. I know that probably spurs more questions than answers, but that's the information that I currently have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Awesome, thank you. Mr. Cowan, did that answer your question or did you still have a question after?
Yes, I do. And maybe Ms. Moore can help me with this one. I am just, I'm not sure I understand the difference in safety. If we're talking about creating virtual learning centers, obviously that means we're putting children in a room with computers. There's got to be supervision. How are we differentiating that? How is that any more safe than a regular classroom with one teacher, maybe reduced size? I'm just having a hard time understanding. And again, I brought this up last week or a previous meeting. I believe the public school system here in Las Cruces gets over $350 million. And I realize they're paying their staff to do their virtual teaching. But couldn't some of those funds be diverted to create, if we're having logistic issues, can we not create some of these virtual centers in the facilities of these schools that are shut down? And since they're all shut down, like a high school, you could put substantially fewer children in a classroom, spread them out, keep that situation safe. The same that we would be recommending for these virtual centers anyway. I'm certain that they're not going to crowd in 50 kids in a 100 square foot room. So my guess is there's these spacing guidelines, protocols. I'm not sure I understand the difference between whether it's a school, you call it a school, or a virtual learning center. Please, has there been any discussion on that and how they justifying that conversation?
So, Mr. Cowan, Mr. Chair, Debbie Moore for the record, I think that is why, Mr. Cowan, you haven't seen some definite quote unquote virtual learning centers created, is there's been a lot of discussion on that. So yes, if there were, I've asked the question, I have not received the answer, more from a state level versus a local level, is how we can accommodate that. That is some of the ideas that we're throwing out there as from the business community. Some of the thoughts process that we've had in the beginning. I think right now, from what I gather, is they're looking more to the license, like Boys and Girls Club, things of that nature that's already licensed, already set in stone. I do not have the answer to your question. I've asked the question because one doesn't always connect with the other. And yes, if we have virtual learning centers, could we use our schools? I think it all is going to depend on ultimately where the school district goes and then what are the guidelines. So actually, if theoretically there were, let's just say, a learning center set up in a gymnasium, it would have to be followed by the COVID and all the safe practices that go with youth programs and all the reentry guidelines. But right now, really, we talk about virtual learning centers, they're more in theory than reality. And so no one has made that call just because of what you said, because there's a lot of questions. What if we can do this? Can we do that? So that's what I'm waiting on. And that's why I watch all that to see, as you know, statewide chair of the statewide chambers, how I can encourage our communities who have recovery boards just like us to work with their local districts. So I really don't have an answer. There's a lot of questions about it. regarding that. And I don't know, I don't have the answer. I can tell you there's not been any guidance sent down from PED early childhood, other than I was surprised to see that document today, and I'm really interested to go do the links.
And so, Ms. Moore, do you feel like that maybe that could be some kind of an action, a plan that we would create, is maybe to ask our council to seek maybe those kind of answers, specifically with Las Cruces Public Schools and their facilities. Am I mistaken in understanding that the facilities themselves belong to each district, and in fact, the principals of each of those facilities are actually in charge of those facilities themselves, so they would actually have some determination on how those facilities could be utilized outside the box. And the reason why I'm asking that is from previous experience. I know that if my organization, Cornerstone Baptist Church, wants to utilize one of those facilities, we do not request permission from a state level or even the regional. We go directly to the principal of the facility and request use for their facility and put in application. So is that possible? And could that be a call to action?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cowan, Debbie Moore for the record. I think it could be a call to action. I think that would have to, since this is COVID and the time are a little different, and I would assume if your organization would work with a principal, there would be a rent involved there because you're a business or a church and things of that nature. So I would think if, say, for example, the chamber would want to do a learning center in one of the schools, then we would have to go through and pay rent. But the concept, I believe, I'm speaking just by prior conversations, but Mr. Cowan, I believe that the concept of a virtual learning center would have to be approved by PED and would have to follow the COVID best practices. I would need to check. It's been discussed, but the specifics on what that would look like. I do know that there has been some conversation about using other government entities, other private entities, such as churches, empty space, big boxes. There's been a lot of things thrown out there on the table, but to my knowledge, unless something's will be announced today, and I can circle back with Secretary Stewart's office in this regard, is that I don't think there's been a firm decision. I know there hasn't been a firm decision on the concept and that name, Virtual Learning Center. But so I really can't say that, but I think that the concept would have to be approved. And then everyone, if we rented space, then we would have to be a business following the COVID best practices. And then you've got the liability issues and all that. So it would be a combination of what the state would designate as a potential, and then you could fill in the blanks there and it could be easier to use private building versus the schools. I don't know the answer to that. As you can see, this conversation is generating a lot of questions, and I've been basically doing this since April, so there's a lot of questions that still have not been answered. I mean, the bottom line is we want our kids to have a successful year. We want them to be back in school where they can get that social skills they need so desperately. And our parents need to break. There are so many pieces of that. And I will say in my conversations with the state, I've been impressed, but there's sympathy, they're sympathetic, and they want to do what's best. I mean, you have many small districts that could theoretically do all green because they have the space, opening up their gymnasiums and social distancing. And so right now, I think that is good. Again, I'm just going to reiterate, it's very important that the communication be between us locally, but as well as how it relates to the state. So we need to make sure that the PED, that we're supporting our school district with the PED and et cetera. Thank you,
So my thought is, if we so we know that the Boys and Girls Club is already implementing a virtual learning. I mean, they've kind of opened up their operation. They already have a program in place that's approved for child involvement. But so they've been able to convert their operation a little bit to accommodate a virtual learning center. of sorts. Obviously, they're limited. But I'm just thinking, you know, an organization like that could quickly expand, maybe with the right resources. Maybe that would be a way where we could have a direction to go, an example to follow, or some kind of action.
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Cowan, Debbie Moore for the record, my response would be, I would ask us to hold off till next week when I potentially can get Ashley on here, Ashley Echeverria, who is their executive director. She's reached out to me. I know in the beginning when they expanded, they weren't getting the responses that they thought they would have, but now that she's got the word out through our various networks, I think they're full. But certainly I would like for her to share the steps she took. But it's my understanding, if they are licensed within and follow the COVID practices for the youth, there is potential to easily expand what's already existing. I think the challenge is, how do we create and cultivate the new idea? So I would say, let's discuss, see what happens today with the PED. I can follow up directly with PED in early childhood Santa Fe, and then I will talk to Dr. Trujillo and Ashley to come next week and tell them these questions, and certainly maybe they can watch this discussion, because we have raised not new questions, but it just tells me I'm not the only one asking these questions. I'm not the only one worried and concerned about the mental health of our children and the teachers. How do we as a community think outside the box? Someone once told me, don't look at it as a box, look at it as a circle, or think creatively. And I think that's where we're at. We want to help our children. We want to help our parents. We want to help our employees. So how do we motivate and navigate ourselves into pivoting and answering those responses? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Cowan.
Okay, everyone, really good information, but I am going to let you know it is 10:45. We're going to get through all these hands that are raised, and we're going to go from there. I think Mrs. Greenwald or Miss Montgomery, or actually it was Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, you had your hand raised, and then we'll go to Miss Greenwald and then go from there. Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Okay, I'll try to do it real quickly. There are a couple examples in the community. That there's one school that's opened up, a private school, the Sea Valley Christian School. It's already in a hybrid model, and they're doing an after-school program. Not so much yet to a virtual learning, but what's happening is they start shifting to a more full day. You lose your space, and so that's the problem with the public schools. Also, is you start putting something in a gym at a public school, and all of a sudden you go to a hybrid model and then go to a full model or something. You have a whole shift of how to use that space and what to do with it. There's some other models, I think, like the Boys Club, Bright Beginnings at United Methodist Church. They're doing a virtual learning center type of program, and so they've already got some of the private or nonprofit organizations are kicking these off a little bit. They're having a heck of a time. It's I mean, besides the technology, it's you have to mentor the student. It could be 5 or 10 different schools, 5 or 10 different curriculums. So it's a real difficult thing, but there are some models out there that we can get some experience from.
Thank you for that. We'll definitely have to look at those and maybe ask some questions of Dr. Trujillo when she's on as well. Miss Greenwald, go ahead. Debbie, I'm going to step away for a minute to make a phone call. If you can watch out for the meeting until I get back, please.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Susan Greenwald for the record. I have a few quick comments, and I feel like at this point in the conversation, maybe they're a little off topic, but and very uninnovative, very deep in the box. But I think one thing that we keep coming back to is this issue of communication and communicating the resources that are available. So this morning, in preparing for the meeting, I used the city's website. I Googled COVID just to see what kind of information and resources would come up. I would tell you that if I am somebody who is frustrated because they're looking for childcare or maybe having an employment situation, it would be very difficult for me to figure out what resources were available, where I could get them, what I needed to do. I don't know if I was in that situation, that would be my first stop, but if it were, I would kind of be in trouble. And it kind of made me think about the current situation with the public schools and the lunch issue, that they're not giving away enough lunches. It might cost them money. And so I think part of that may be that so many people with the very, very, very best of intentions are duplicating that service. Maybe leaving some money then on the table that could be used for something else. So maybe we could look as far as an actionable item into some kind of community list of services that incorporates nonprofits, incorporates city government, incorporates other government sources. That way, that's kind of easy to navigate. Or maybe a little easier to navigate. And my other point would be that maybe the way that we're communicating with people isn't as effective as maybe we think it is. We've learned here at DLCP that Facebook even is where the people are and is the easiest way to get information out really quickly. The email works. So if we kind of hit both, we do a lot better. We've kind of learned that social media maybe is our first and sometimes our last resort, because then that's where people are talking. And I know if you read those comments, it's not good for your anxiety at all, but it's where people are getting their information and where they are communicating with each other, especially maybe those who are disenfranchised to begin with. So those are my comments.
Thank you. And I have Ms. Greenwald, Debbie Moore, for the record, just for you to know, one of the other off topic in another meeting we were talking about is trying to figure out how we get sort of our resources. I mean, we have a lot on our webpage. We utilize Facebook a lot, but still there's still a disconnect. And so there's several of us that are trying to figure out how can we have one-stop shop sort of resource. So thank you very much for that input. So I'm going to check our website out and see what's on it. So with that, I think Sharon, Mrs. Thomas, I think you were next, but I don't know.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was late. I had a doctor's appointment. So I'm just catching up here. So Debbie, I'm understanding that you brought some materials to the meeting and that about that have to do with childcare, and that we're all going to get those. You're going to send forward it to everybody on the board.
Yes, Mrs. Thomas, Mr. Chair, Debbie Moore, for the record. The PED sent out several information pieces this morning, about 10 minutes before the meeting, and one of them was on childcare. And so I had Francisco show it, and it will be forwarded to you. And we're asking all of our board members here to forward it out to your network. There are some links that for if you're wanting childcare, whatever you're looking for, it seems to be, I've not checked the links, Mrs. Thomas, but it looks like it's a really good document. So yes, we will be sending, I have some, and then Francisco's going to be sending it out.
Okay, thank you very much. And and then we should also, we should also forward it to the city councilors, because they almost all have big email lists that they send information to regularly to people in their districts. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. Debbie Moore, for the record. I'm sure that the city will do that, and they are also on my email list. So we'll hit them from a couple of areas.
Yeah, we'll get them. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Montgomery?
Thank you, Debbie. Brooke Montgomery, for the record. So I took like 3 pages of notes of what everybody has said. In terms, a lot came to mind. I'm thinking about actionable items. We may not be able to really know until we hear from Ashley and Dr. Trujillo in a week. But on that, depending on what they say, there were some actionable items that we could address. We just don't have all the information yet. One thing was when Judge Cowan was in, Debbie, when you and Mr. Cowan were speaking about buildings, that's something I brought up earlier and was thinking about myself. So when you had said, think about empty buildings and places they could do virtual learning centers, I was thinking about if we don't know by next week, could we, like, if the schools can use their built facilities. So like, I'm just gonna throw it out there, and I'm sensitive to the fact that schools are trying really hard. I know that there's like the PED and there's all these governmental regulations and we're not regulating. What I'm thinking is we may say that's not an answer in a week. Like, it's not an answer, and the parents and our businesses are at risk of failing. So if it's not an answer, being sensitive that they're trying their best and their hands are slapped, they can't open the school buildings. Can the city look for empty buildings? And are the regulations different between what the state and the PED are saying compared to what the city and the mayor and the city councilor can do? I don't know, but that's an actionable item. So for example, let's say that the situation is something like this. The school building can't be used, even the community schools concept, where we're supposed to be able to use these community schools, and the council was kind enough to put in money for 4 schools, and Councilor Gandera had brought that up, right? But if they can't open the community schools, we just say that's not an option right now. Because what we're hearing is we have this, but the parents don't really have it, and the small business owners don't have it. So if in a week we say we don't know still and we're not hearing back, let's just I would suggest we take the approach that we start making actionable items where the city council and the mayor can do something to intervene. So we don't say anymore, we can use city building. So let's say they say to us, there's too much liability to use the gym. Even if we compartmentalize them up, we can't even get them in half day for virtual learning because there's liability. We don't have the PPE. Let's just say they don't have PPE, for example. Well, everybody has to have PPE because that's part of that PowerPoint I got from the PED, from the civics guy that I met at the Chamber of Commerce, right? Everybody has to have PPE in order for the state regulating this to approve them open. Let's say hypothetically the school district doesn't have PPE and that there's a backup and they're not going to get it. And the parents don't know this, and we don't know, and we're not making actual items because we're assuming that the poor LCPS are going to be able to open and they won't be able to. Okay, so if they can't in a week, then we just say we're sensitive to their problems. They're regulated by a state government and LCPS cannot open. So then we say, hey, city council, mayor, would it be possible to take an action item to look for city buildings? And if they say the city can't open buildings because there's need for PPE, and maybe they won't. Maybe they say kids can bring their own PPE, we can clean it up, we can do it like the daycares. Maybe that's an actionable item. And they start opening up city buildings and the funding goes there if there's empty buildings and they become the virtual learning centers. But we just take the schools off the board because it's not going to happen. If in a week we don't see it happening, I would say we don't assume that it's going to happen. Because it seems to me, not even feels, logically by the PowerPoints I'm getting, and I get also I'm getting the information from these PED emails and stuff because I've joined webinars, and it seems like there's huge requirements to open, which are good because we want the kids to be safe, but they're also impediments because there are requirements that I don't know if the school district can overcome. So let's say they don't have the ability to do it. Then there's all these daycares who are like, wait, we need help. The daycare workers have lost their jobs and they need help reopening, but yet there's this model of how it worked. In that model, when Ashley lets us know about it more, are the parents paying because when Francisco Pro said there was 50 million for small businesses and 100 million, I didn't get that note on what it was for, but let's just say the 50 million. Is that part of what, or the other money, is that helping parents get their kids into these virtual learning centers? And is that how they pay if they go to Boys and Girls Club with Ashley? And if that's a model that works, can these businesses that are childcare providers become virtual learning centers while they're not billing the parents for the 3 hours that the kids are there for Zoom or whatnot? And that's an issue. And I will say, I have 4 kids that are school age. I have 6 kids and a grandson. So I have, on my end of that, I have them all doing different things. And it's really, it's a huge load on me. And I will say, I do have one child going to Mesilla Valley Christian School, and it's wonderful. And they're doing a great job with their phasing and their communication. and they built a wall in their gym. And like what Mr. Miller had said, I always know that may not be feasible for everybody because it's a smaller space, but it might be feasible to take that along with what Ashley did and join those two concepts together, either by the city council and mayor saying here's some buildings and we can do it, or by our private businesses doing it. And we say this is the action item if we could do that. Because it's not fair, because even with 4 kids, I can't afford to have all 4 at Mississippi Valley Christian School. I mean, they're great, they're doing wonderful, and she's around 4 other kids spaced out with her mask on the entire time, no transportation or food. It's, I feel she's safe, but can other people do that? Well, yeah, maybe childcare centers. Also, Sylvan Learning Center, I have experience with this, they're great as well, but they couldn't make a virtual learning center right away. They heard about it because they were licensed as education. An education business license could not apparently be virtual learning center. So we need to know that model with Ashley because they have to go relicense to be childcare because educational centers apparently couldn't be virtual learning centers until they re-registered and got permits to be childcare. And so why is that a barrier for a place that's a tutoring center to be able to be a virtual learning center and without re-registering and getting a permit to be a childcare center? So that kind of goes along with what Mr. Cowan had said. I get it, like the safety. We can't open the schools, fine. But, and Ms. Gander said that it's just not possible. It's not safe. What about the PPE? Is that going to even happen? Fine. We've accepted it. I think all the parents that I've seen have accepted that. Okay, can we find another solution? In that, I know I probably sound like it's just a lot, but what if we said, okay, why can't we remove some of these barriers for the licensing for privatized education or tutoring centers so that they can become, and I'll say Mississippi Valley Christian School has the after school care because they already had a child care license permit. It's not the education permit for their private school. I believe when I spoke to Dr. Foreman there, that they already had a permit and they were doing after school care. So what happened was they were going to do 50% until the governor announced when the numbers were increasing that it's not safe. So they went to 25% and they had to open up new buildings and put a wall in their gym. But the kids could do childcare because of the license and they were able to split them up. But to me, my mind did go the same direction was, well, if you can do childcare with 25 to 50 kids and spread them out, why couldn't you do education? And it's because the barrier was education. It has to be childcare. And so those are things that I've seen having 4 kids in 4 different things. I have 2 kids in remote learning with public school, 1 that I homeschool, and 1 at Mississippi Valley Christian School. And that's all the things that I've seen.
So, Ms. Montgomery, just to be more for the record, in expedience of time, all of what you said has been thrown on the table. It goes back to the licensing. It goes back to how the COVID practices fits in all this model. And I believe what Francisco referred to was the 50 million that will be, their portion will be distributed to businesses. However, I thought, it was my understanding that the city at a special meeting on August 27th distributed some money to childcare users and childcare businesses somehow. And that's what I was asking for, is where is that distribution as it impacts childcare? So I think there are a lot of parameters. This discussion, again, it is so complicated because of all the licensing, and even in the middle of COVID, how can we navigate that? And yeah, we all see, I mean, I've talked about the empty Sears building and the empty Kmart. How can we work this? How can we make this happen? And there is a lot of barriers, but at the same time, there's also a lot of concern over liability. So what I can do, Mr. Chair, with your guidance is I would ask it to put back on the agenda. I will try to confirm with Dr. Trujillo, try to get Ashley, but I will also see if perhaps we could get someone from NMPED or early childhood to actually be on the call either next week or in some time in the future to actually talk about some of these boundaries, because all the government agencies have challenges, they have boundaries, then where does the private business fit in? So it's that, Mr. Chair, that's what I would ask.
It sounds like a motion needs to be made because I think that's a really good ask. Especially when we have more people on the call that can answer these questions.
So would you like for me to
Make a
move that
motion.
we add this, continue to add this, at least for next week, the topic of childcare, and I ask Dr. Trujillo and Ashley Echeverria from Boys and Girls Club, as well as consider getting someone either from PED or early childhood on the call. I move that motion.
Thank you. Do I hear a second for that motion?
Brooke Montgomery, I second that motion.
Okay, so I have a movement and a second on the floor to continue this conversation next week when we have more people on the call, including Boys and Girls Club and LCPS. Any discussion items on this? And I just want to remind everyone that it is 11:04 and we're still on the first discussion item. So. Mr. Cohen, you have your hand raised.
I do. I just want to maybe give some information to the board here. In order for a private school to operate in New Mexico, they do not have to be subjected to the Department of Education. They are not under the guidelines of the Department of Education. And therefore, anybody can open up a private school and operate accordingly. They just have to operate under the guidelines of the Department of Health and follow some other guidelines with attendance laws and immunizations and things like that. And so that would be very important that we understand that. So if somebody wanted to operate a private school and utilize the empty Kmart building and operated that under the guidelines of the Corona spacing and all of that type of situation, that's a feasibility. And there, I'm not sure I understand if there would be anything to prohibit them from utilizing the Las Cruces Public Schools curriculum if it is being provided. So on that particular thing, I'm not sure, but I do know that a private school can operate without having to go through the Department of Education.
Thank you for that clarification. But on the motion that is on the floor, is there any discussion besides the motion in the second? As I'm seeing no hands raised, can I please get a roll call vote on the motion on the floor?
This is on the motion to re-include childcare services for the next meeting of the Las Cruces Economic Recovery Board. Mr. Michael Harris?
Yes.
Mr. George Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Sharon Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Brooke Montgomery?
Yes.
Ms. Veronica Archuleta is absent. Mr. Ron Fitzherbert? Mr. Ron Fitzherbert is absent. Mr. Doc Cowan?
Yes.
Ms. Susan Greenwald?
Yes.
Ms. Jolene Martinez?
Yes.
Ms. Darlene Lopez?
Yes.
Ms. Debbie Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion passes.
Wonderful. Oh, let me turn on my camera. So moving on to the next discussion item, we do have the Economic Development PRC Business Impact Survey. And I think we're just going to go over the findings on that. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair, and this is Francisco Pallares for the record. Let me start sharing my screen so that we can start the discussion with regards to this. Give me 1 second. Okay. Excellent. And let me start. Just let me know if you can see my full screen here.
Yes, we can see.
Excellent. This was originally a survey that was conducted by the Economic Development Department of the City of Las Cruces. In essence, this survey was conducted between the months of June to July. If I recall properly, we opened the survey back in June 24th of 2020, and then we closed it in July 22nd of 2020. And in essence, what we're trying to figure out was collect information to see exactly, well, not exactly, because it doesn't have enough observations so as to make a representative sample. Nevertheless, at least get a picture, right? At least getting a picture of what have been some of the effects that have incurred in our local economy, and specifically to businesses, and how they have reacted to that with the coronavirus pandemic. I think that the information that I'm going to be describing it's kind of like a combination of some of the economic research that we conduct in the Economic Development Department. So it's kind of like a combination of third-party entity collection agencies, such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as some of the information that we got from the survey. So this was originally presented at the Las Cruces, sorry, not the Las Cruces, the Economic Development Policy Review Committee back in August. And now it is, as it was presented to them, I will be presenting this to you. Initially, I added a slide with regards to labor force right there on your panel on your left. You will be able to observe the unemployment rate for the city of Las Cruces as it is collected by the local area unemployment statistics on a monthly basis. And as you can see, the average right there was about 5% for the entire year 2019. And actually, we were doing quite well for January, February, but then we started seeing those big increases starting on March to having that spike, the highest peak right there on April, which is when everything was closed, getting to be up to 12.3% unemployment rate. Right now, it's been coming down as more progressions with the openings have started to occur. Right now, it's about 9%. And I think they just released the July figures, but I haven't collected those yet. But I presume that it's right around 9 to 8%, or right in between those. Now, on the panel on the right, you have the total non-farm payroll employment for the city of Las Cruces, sorry, for the Las Cruces metropolitan statistical area. And this one represents pretty much the entire county, whereas the panel on your left is for the 100,000 people that represent the city of Las Cruces. The panel on your right represents the 213,000 people that live in the county as the metropolitan statistical area. You can see that payroll employment substantially decreased, and this is in thousands. So it used to be constantly staying right around between 74 to 76,000 payroll employment in the Las Cruces MSA, which is substantially dropped back in April. We are seeing a recovery starting on May. And again, some of this information has not yet been updated or to incorporate it. It's amazing that with COVID, having month-to-month data it can be very, very crucial for understanding this. Whereas before you wouldn't have much fluctuations between month to month. But right now it is. But you can start seeing that the recovery is starting to occur. We are trying to see, we're going to be waiting, seeing how that recovery happens, and whether it's a V-shaped recovery, that means that the recovery is at a faster pace, or whether it is a U-shape in which we're moving at kind of like a lower pace. But that is yet to be seen. On the next panel, I have the number of SNAP recipients that have happened since the pandemic started. So the number the columns in blue represent the number of SNAP recipients in the overall Doña Ana County. And it is a proxy, right? A proxy, it's a variable that approximates something that we're trying to track specifically with this in a more frequent manner. And to me, what this reflects is the number of individuals that would qualify to get some type of this assistance, which is a proxy for poverty, right? I mean, you can see that there's a lot of individuals that are willing, that need some of this assistance from looking at a graph like this. And again, the jump starts occurring with April, but in here, the behavior is a bit different, and there's several explanations for that. The behavior starts increasing from March, then goes to April. But in this case, this peak is not achieved in April. The peak is achieved actually in June, So we have the highest number of cases. Now, there were some discussions that I was requesting with regards to this information, and apparently there was flexibility on the amount of people that would be able to access some of these SNAP benefits. So some of that requirements were a bit loose once the pandemic started, which makes more people eligible. So that could be a portion of why we see those increases right there, as well as those individuals that are really experiencing some of this need for that. So we have both of those elements incorporated into those changes. The third one is information that we have collected from the Community Development Department in the city of Las Cruces, in which we have business registrations and we have business renewals. As you can see it, the yellowish orangish color represents the average number of business registrations and the business renewals that we have since 2010 to 2019. So the average number for that specific month, it kind of resembles normality, at least since it has been behaving since 10 years. So the green line represents the observations that we had for this specific year. As you can see, we were lagging even from January and February. Despite having low unemployment rates, there were some business registrations that were I guess postponed for some of the individuals. And you can see substantially on the panel on your right, as well as on your panel on the left, that April was one of those months that was substantially affected. I suppose that many of the business owners in the city postponed their business registrations or even opening their businesses in April due to the health orders, right? The quarantining and everything that is associated to that. So there's several interactions that we can see from here. So this is some of the information we collected from the Community Development Department. Now, what about from the survey results that we conducted in this specific month we refer to? From June 24th to July 22nd of 2020. The survey we conducted, about 95 respondents answered to it. And we send it to which is actually a pretty good response rate compared to some of the surveys we have sent in the past. And 95 individuals that are business owners, and these are all business owners, are responded to in the following manner. We have a good portion of them that are in retail, a good portion of them that are in other services that can be your nail salon, that can be your carpet cleaners, that can be your different categories that fall under that other services, as well as food and accommodation services. So that is the breakdown of the people that responded to our survey, at least in their industry. One of the questions we asked is, what is the current operating status of your business? And a lot of them responded at least at 32%. So that's 1 out of every 3 of the 95 respondents that they were operating between 76 to 100% capacity. But we also had that about 25% were responding that they were open with operations up to 25%. So that is 1 out of every 4 would be operating in this substantially reduced manner. A big portion of them, if we add those that closed voluntarily, plus those that were forced to close, that accounts for about 13% of individuals that responded to this survey mentioned that they were closed at least in some point. The next question we asked was, since the beginning of the pandemic, has your weekly revenue increased, decreased, or remained the same? The vast majority of the businesses that responded that there was some form of a decrease, right? So if we add that 29%, the 15%, the 18%, and the 14%, that all represent decreases, that adds up substantially. There was a big portion also that, well, not big, but 14% that said that the revenue has remained constant. And then we actually had some individuals that said that the revenue had increased since the pandemic. And so we have those individuals as well that were able to see, and actually we could experience that, right? We were able to see that there's industries that were actually doing much, much better during the pandemic than before. However, it is not the case for everyone, as you can see in this graph. Now, on this one, we asked the question, how have you handled the payroll or your workforce? And in this is a check all that applies. So there's multiple answers, and the addition of this is not going to add to 95. because they could check as many as they wanted with regards to this. So a lot of people actually checked on the fact that they had no changes on the workforce and on their payroll. Some people did hiring freezes, which means that they're not going to hire anyone, but they're not going to fire anyone. And then there's other individuals that had furloughs or that they had temporary cuts in hours. So what this is telling us from the business community perspective is that businesses basically took a hit, right? And not only that, when they took the hit, they did not necessarily always furlough, they did not necessarily always cut the hours or separated their employees from their work. A lot of them had no changes. Some of them even increased in the hiring, but that was in the minority portion. What percentage of your workforce is working remotely? About half of the individuals, and this is this adds to 100%. About half of those individuals say that all of their staff is working on site, which is very, very, very scary, right? At least, I mean, from the perspective of having a pandemic and having my assumption here, and this is just my assumption and my thought process, is that if the business could have gone remotely, they would have. So the reason that they're not going remotely is because they can't. So that provides multiple information, because then the support would be like, how can we assist you moving some of your operations to an online fashion or an online manner, right? And the second question is, how can we assist you in spreading the word with having COVID safe practices, right? Which makes the relevance for the Las Cruces Safe Promise be there. About 18% of the people who responded, businesses who responded, mentioned that all of their staff was working remotely. And then we have a set of combinations of individuals that were working remotely and that were working on site. An extra question we asked is, if only partially open or temporarily closed, what resources will be required for your company to relaunch, consider a phased restart, and select all that apply? Again, this is not additive to 95 because they could pick any amount they wanted. Most of them mentioned that they would need some form of assistance with payroll capital, right? And most people refer to the fact that they would need grants. There was also a big portion that mentioned with regards to online access. So individuals were looking to see in which ways we could get some online access, how they could change and adapt to the circumstances and their situations, so that they could access their customers in a safer manner and in an online form. So this has been actually the inspiration for the Economic Development Department to start to seek some solutions with regards to that with some of our partners. In regards to helping businesses going online, and specifically with the Arrowhead Center, to try to see in which ways with their specialties we can seek assistance, we can provide assistance for those businesses that are seeking to go online and to approach their customers. The next question we asked is, have you applied for the EIDL or the PPP through the U.S. Small Business Administration, or to any of the other resources that have been made available by the state? So the vast majority of them applied for the PPP or for the EIDL. There were a portion that were going to bank loans. There were a portion that were going to other type of financing in order to survive with regards to the pandemic. Based on the current circumstances, how long do you feel you can remain a viable business? Was the next question. At about a third of individuals mentioned that they would be viable for more than a year. But then the scary portion is, of course, that about 10%, that is 1 out of every 10, mentioned that they would not be viable for a month. So what we did with the Economic Development Department is that we reached out to the businesses that provided or asked or requested for the help, and seeing which ways we could be assisting them. So as I'm telling you, this presentation is from back in July, and this was already presented at another board. And we already took the appropriate steps to go for some of those businesses that wanted to be reached out and that needed to have some assistance for some of the things that they were mentioning to us. What are your top 3 concerns for the next 12 months? The vast majority of individuals answered that one of their top concern was a second wave of COVID-19 business closures. So this is also highly informative, because this means that businesses see as a threat, the biggest threat, as being not being able to operate their business, right? And the public health orders are completely attached on how we perform with regards to the numbers of the pandemic. So the fact that we are able to contain the pandemic will be crucial so that the public health orders continue to be more flexible as to remaining open. So that should be an eye opener for everyone, right? I mean, the better we all perform at containing the pandemic, the better we will be at maintaining this openness. And the second portion that individuals were looking at is that there was low consumer confidence and low consumer spending as a potential threat that they saw. The next one, which is very close to another one, actually, we'll put it kind of like a technical draw, was a global recession or a US recession combined with the number of employee stress. So that was as a kind of like a tie in number 3. So there are businesses that are experiencing that their employees are feeling stressed and that this is a major concern for them. When do you think your revenues will recover to pre-COVID levels? Individuals, about the half of individuals mentioned that they will be recovering with this for more than 12 months. More than a year. Actually, 5% of them even mentioned that their revenues had increased since COVID. And individuals that they were saying, the vast majority of them think that it's going to be, well, if you combine it, it's about half that is going to be in the next 12 months or up to the next 12 months. There was an open question in which individuals were able to express themselves with regards to some of the possibilities of what they see working together as they navigate through the economic recovery. And this was all sorts of different questions, right? So what I did is that I started going through it and started kind of like picking the catchphrases or picking the main topic that individuals were referring to. And they're kind of listed right in here. So one of the main things is that people were concerned about maintaining health first. So making sure that they contain the pandemic. So these are business owners that are completely aware that the better we perform at containing the pandemic, the better we perform at maintaining health as the number one priority, the faster, the sooner we will be able to open up. There were some individuals that mentioned to having concise rules, having financial relief, easing the restrictions that have occurred, having loans and grant assistance, buying local, social media. There were some concerns with regards to the minimum wage, as well as the business friendliness and reducing the burden on businesses. So that was the presentation that I had back in, I think it was August 17th, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair, in which we had this discussion with the Economic Development PRC. And I know we have about 4 minutes, so I'll take any questions if there's any within that time frame, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Cowan has his hand raised already. Go ahead, Mr. Cowan.
Yes, sir, Mr. Pallares. Do you have any, on that last slide, do you have any percentages to those inputs? I don't know, there were 6 or 8 points that folks said that they thought is hindering them, or if they were relieved. Do you have any percentage numbers on each of those points?
Mr. Cowan, Mr. Chair, I could get it because it's more or less the way in which I based it, as I was mentioning, this was an open-ended question. People could put an essay or people could just say one word, right? So I condensed it to the main idea. Sometimes there were instances in which they were referring to 2 ideas. So it's not a methodologically proven way, but I could attach a percentage, but it would be fallible, right? Because this was just an open-ended question. Again, individuals that listed an essay, right? Mentioning several points, and individuals that just said this.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, you have your hand raised, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Michael Harris. So I guess something that I think would be interesting to know is maybe some more specifics. If we do a second round of surveys and maybe Debbie at the chamber can help get this information too. But when somebody says like reduce the burden on business, that's not something we can recommend to the council. We'd have to have something that's actually like concrete. In what way is your business burdened, and what can we recommend that the city actually do? So I think that would maybe surveying a little more specifically would be interesting. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, or concerns for Mr. Francisco about the presentation we just saw? Okay, Mrs. Moore, Miss Debbie Moore. I know that we talked about, and Mr. Harris brought it up just now, talking about reducing the burden on businesses. So yes, that is a part of our job, is to figure out what that burden is, which we just learned in this presentation a little bit about that burden. Have you heard of anything through your networks about what can help with that? I know that, the Department of Health and the Environment Department now are doing like virtual checks with restaurants, and they're calling, and you're doing like a Zoom call with them and stuff like that. And that's a lot easier to deal with than having someone physically in your restaurant, in your kitchen, that you don't know and stuff like that. So I know those burdens are being released and lifted off of our shoulders right now. But is there anything else? I know we talked about fees, business renewal license fees and stuff like that. Is there anything else on top of that that you can possibly think of that maybe us as a board can put forth to council? Even if it's a countywide thing and we can get council to recommend something to the county saying this would really help Las Cruces and Doniana businesses.
Mr. Chair, board members, Debbie Moore for the record. I believe my assumption of the burden would be regulations, regulatory restraints, and it would depend on the industry you talk to. I think one of the things we could do here is potentially listen to maybe some fees, annual fees that directly impact businesses. I know some economic recovery boards across the nation are recommending cities and or counties, but we're working with cities, put them on hold or reduce them for a time period for small business. So I think in response to the survey, they are talking about specifically municipality, city regulatory restraints. It could be as simple as the fee structure. So I think part of what we need to do is maybe listen to a presentation from the city regarding what fees directly impact businesses as a whole. As now we know there are regulatory restraints, there are guidelines, there are procedures. If you're building a new building, if you're starting a new business, that impacts some people, but not for others, some industries other than the others. So I would challenge the city to potentially bring us a list that impact all businesses as a whole and look and see how we can address that. I think on the statewide, we could certainly continue to communicate with the governor's office on some of the statewide things. I will tell you, looking at the 2021 legislative session on a statewide issue, there will be some that we will be looking at. But it is my feeling that particularly with this one, this is very specific. So the city would have to bring us some that would, for us to look at. I mean, it could be the business registration. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we cut it in half for a year. I mean, theoretically, and things like that, knowing full well, that would impact the budget. They'd have to be approved of that nature. But to find an issue that impacts all businesses, because we couldn't just pick out one that impacts one industry.
Okay, I think that's great, actually. And Francisco, I see your hand is raised, but I don't necessarily think we need a presentation. Maybe if we can get a sheet that shows what licensures are out there, whether it's like a cosmetology licensure that you need to register for your business with the city or something like that. I would really love to see those. And that way, maybe we can just take a look at it and recommend something, because that's a very easy recommendation, right? It's okay, these 15 fees affect businesses across the spectrum. Can we take a look at this and what this means to Las Cruces businesses? I think that would definitely help. So if there's a list that we can get, I mean, I don't think we need a presentation. I think just a spreadsheet that goes over, registration, business, X amount of dollars yearly or bi-yearly or monthly or whatever the fee is would be really nice. So that's what I'm going to recommend that maybe we can get, and I'll work on contacting city staff on that. Mr. Harris, you do have your hand raised, sir.
Yeah, if I could add a request to that, and it would be also a list of how many, so if you have a fee that impacts a certain sector, how many businesses are in that sector and how many people might be impacted. And then we could, you know, I agree. I think we should just get this sent out so that people can digest it. But then we can evaluate, you know, what's going to have the most impact and go from there.
Okay. And I think that was kind of part of the presentation we just got to about, so they should have that data. I will email city staff as soon as we're done with this meeting. Francisco, does that sound like something that's easy and that we can do in the meantime that we can just talk about next meeting?
Mr. Chair, Francisco Pallares for the record. On the schedule of fees, I think that's something that is relatively easy to get. On the industries that we have, that might be a bit more difficult. I mean, we do have some industries that are listed to some degree on the 2-digit NAICS codes, but I would have to double check because I know that there was a change in which we moved some softwares, and I just want to double check whether that's still something that is being collected by our community development department. So if it is, that would be something that is available. If it is not, I mean, that's something that I have to check.
Perfect. Okay. So at least we can get the fee schedule. That would be perfect, and that would help us make some really good decisions for actionable items to suggest to the city council. So let's work on that. And if we can just email that in the meantime, we can digest it personally, and then we can bring it to the board with ideas on fee structures and what we might be able to do as far as that goes. With that being said, is there any more comments, questions, or concerns with the economic development PRC business impact survey that we just went over? I know that that data was from June and July, but it was still a good idea and showed us what we're up against here locally. As seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to future discussions. We do have 2 on future discussions, and we are 5 minutes over, but let's just wrap it up if we can. Future discussions, workforce connections scholarship, and then topics to be discussed. Ms. Lopez, do you have an update? I don't think we should necessarily be discussing it today, but any update would help.
I think that what I can say is that we should have a lot more insight. I think Francisco and I met. We have a concept developing. There's some questions that have already been answered. So I think that, for next week, we'll be ready to be able to give an update to everyone and at least be able to shine some light on where we are and the feasibility.
Perfect. That is very exciting. So with that being said too, I think that in the meantime, if there is any drafts that come out saying, this is what our target audience is, this is what we're looking at, this is what we want to achieve, I think we should definitely get that out to the board. The sooner the better so we can digest it. I think our issue just across the board is we're not digesting things in the off time. We're getting a presentation, we're digesting it, and then we're unfortunately just spouting out all these questions because we're not taking the time to look at things. So I think we should definitely get as much information in the off week that we can. So if you get anything, please do forward that to city staff and get that out to us. That would be very, very helpful.
Okay, I'll work with Francisco and Griselda to get to the final of the first draft and we'll get you guys some outline.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I do appreciate that. With that being said, we now have 3 discussion items for next week. Those 3 discussion items are going to be the one that passed earlier, which is going to be to rediscuss and continue childcare with Boys and Girls Club and Dr. Karen Trujillo with the LCPS. We also are going to we're going to look at the fee schedule for licensure fees and business fees with the city of Las Cruces. We are going to go over those. We're going to see if there's anything that we can suggest to city council to help business in this time. I know that registration fees are always fun to get those in the mail. So we're going to look at that. And then it sounds like we're also going to have an update on the workforce connection scholarship. So those are three things, and I very much so believe that the first is going to take a very large portion of our meeting. So with that being said, I think we should just stick to those three discussion topics for next week. But at this time, I see some hands raised, and I hope it's about future discussion items because that would be really nice to hear. Mr. Francisco, I do see your hand raised, sir.
Sorry, sorry, Mr. Chair, you cut off for a second. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Excellent. Mr. Chair, just to double check on the schedule, you just wanted an email, correct? Just sending the email, or do you actually want to have this as a discussion for next week?
Yes, I want both. I want the email so we can take a look at it between now and next meeting. And then I want to talk about it next meeting to see if there's some fees or anything that we can propose to City Council to help relieve burdens on small business as soon as possible. There does not need a presentation, though. It will be led by me and possibly Miss Debbie Moore about what fees we think can be relieved temporarily. So yeah, no presentation needed. Mr. Cowan, you do have your hand raised.
Yes, this is Doug Cowan. I just wanted to see if Mr. Pallares thought he could get, I realize it wouldn't be scientific numbers, but if we could see the percentage on those last points on that last slide, that would perhaps help us as we also look at those other fee structures and things like that. Maybe we may be assuming that there's a high percentage of folks looking at regulatory and it may not be regulatory. And so it would be very helpful if we saw, even if it's rough numbers on that last slide. That would be very helpful on that discussion, I think.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that recommendation. Francisco, did you get that recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's doable. Mm-hmm.
Perfect, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, with that being said, if anyone has any future discussion items that they want to get off their chest and voice right now, let's please do that. If not, we're gonna start wrapping it up as we have a lot to discuss next week. As I see none, excuse me, our future discussion items for next week: childcare, fee structure, fee schedule, if you will, any alleviation there, and then just an update on the workforce connection scholarships. And hopefully we'll have some kind of a little tidbit that we can read in the interim. With that being said, is there any general announcements that anyone wants to give to the board? Mr. Francisco, yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, Francisco Pallares for the record. I just wanted to remind everyone on the Las Cruces Economic Recovery Board to please state the safe promise. The board was supportive of the safe promise. So please, if everyone in the board could take the Las Cruces safe promise, that would speak a lot on the commitment to this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Brooke Montgomery.
Francisco, I directed several of my students that have recently registered their businesses to the Las Cruces Safe Promise page and the New Mexico Safe Promise page. I'm saying that right. We looked at it together, and I don't know if I was looking at it wrong, but maybe at some point when you make an announcement on that page, if you could show it to us a little more. It was hard when I first went on the page to know what the promises were until they clicked on and registered to do the training. And I thought maybe it would be easier for some of my students to kind of see what it is when we share the page first before they register their business. I went to the New Mexico one, and it wasn't very descriptive. That might help increase the applicants. Thank you.
Okay. No, we'll definitely take a look at that. As I'm looking at it right now as well. Okay, cool. Any other announcements? As I'm seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
This is Michael Harris. I'll motion to adjourn.
Beautiful. I have a motion by Mr. Harris to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Debbie Moore for the record, I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. And from what I'm being told again, we do not need a vote for the adjournment of the meeting. So we are adjourned. I will see you all next Thursday. And you all have a great afternoon. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks, you too.